Hi, welcome back to our Road to Steam series, a series in which we'll be creating a game from scratch. Previously on our Hus Dev Diaries, we implemented a slash effect for our sword strikes. In today's episode, we're making some big changes to the game. Interested to follow the progress of our game? Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to get all the latest development updates every week. Today's episode was supposed to be on hit effects. We began working on them in July with great success, however, we've also allowed ourselves to become sidetracked along the way. We fell down a rabbit hole of interesting ideas we wanted to implement inside the game. These small updates accumulated over time and became a huge behemoth we hadn't anticipated. Our original goal was to cook up one massive devlog to show everything, but this proved to be a terrible idea. Editing time got so out of proportions that we weren't able to deliver a single devlog in the past few months. Because of that, we're now stuck with a big pile of new content just begging to be released. To deal with this annoying situation, we've decided to divide this huge update into multiple videos that will drop over the coming weeks. So strap in those jibbies, because we are going in Rambo style. During our long hiatus, we took time to revisit multiple parts of our game design, so that we could update it with ideas we picked up along the way. One area that got a lot of attention is the narrative side of our game. Since the beginning of our journey, we've had a general idea of what the story of Hus would be. However, we never took the time to fully polish it so that we could have one solid draft. Until today. By clearing out the finer details of our narrative over the past few months, it had the unexpected effect of making some of our current visuals obsolete. That's why in today's episode we'll focus on updating the look of our game, so that we can realign it with the new story advancements we brought forward. We're still not ready to officially divulge what the narrative is about yet, however, keep attention, because now every new detail added is a clue that leads to the bigger picture. With that in mind, our first order of business will be to touch up our 2D environment. In addition to our current playground, we plan to have multiple other unique places as you progress through the game. But to make these different locations truly special, a particular focus must be put on their atmosphere. The problem with our current environment is that its ambience does not fit the context of our narrative. We need something bleaker and darker, instead of a bright and saturated scenery. To accomplish this, we took inspiration from one of the best visual director of the movie business. The one and only, Zack Snyder. Be it from his older movies like 300 and Sucker Punch, or from his most recent ones like Man of Steel, Watchmen, and Batman v Superman, each of his productions brings a striking visual style that stays with the viewer. The secret of his technique can be found in the mastery of color palettes. To create a bleak and striking atmosphere, Zack Snyder will use muted tones from a single color to characterize his scenes. By taking advantage of a monochromatic color palette like this, you can easily accentuate the ambience of any visuals you create, as colors are known to be closely linked to how we feel. But the master still has some tricks up his sleeves. In addition to this monochromatic technique, Snyder will often combine muted tones with contrasting colors. This discordant visual presentation helps to highlight specific details of a scene and burn them into the viewer's psyche, may it be characters, objects, or even special effects. One game that does this marvelously is Hollow Knight. In Hollow Knight, each environment is characterized by a muted color palette in accordance with the feel of the location. Then, specific contrasting colors are used to capture the attention of the player and elicit striking emotions. Emotions such as danger, wonder, and even beauty. In Hus, we plan to follow in the footsteps of our betters and use those same techniques to give a more unique atmosphere to each of our battlegrounds. For our current environment, we'll go with warm muted tones of yellow, which will open the stage for the contrasting hit effects we'll introduce in the next video. To complete this big makeover, we devised a 4-step process. We first start by desaturating our current environment to make it bleaker. We went with a value of about 50%. The higher the desaturation, the easier it will be to make our characters and effects stand out during gameplay. Next on the list is to add our color palette. We apply a warm yellow tint to evoke the feeling of an ancient and mystical place. We then darken the whole image to give more of a twilight feel to the environment. For the final step, we'll bring some little adjustments to our current sky. The problem we have with it at the moment is that it feels too jam-packed together, as if the heavens are about to fall onto our heads. Our goal is to clear our skybox a little bit to free our background and give it more breathing room. To accomplish this, we'll combine the clear horizon of our original sky with some clouds from our latest iteration, striking a good balance between the two. With the mood of our environment updated, it's now time to add some dynamic interactions to really bring its atmosphere to the next level. What we have in mind is something we've wanted to implement for a long time. A wind simulation. Our main inspiration for this effect comes from the game, Witcher 3. In The Witcher 3, the player has access to a huge landmass to explore. As you traverse its huge open world, you'll find no shortage of trees surrounding you. They'll react realistically to the multiple climate conditions the game conjures, therefore greatly enhancing the atmosphere of any area you find yourself lost in. However, we suspect that no real wind simulation was created to accomplish this effect. What we think is really happening behind the hood is that the trees are all individually animated to give the illusion of wind. It's a smart and efficient way to do things, as a real simulation would be a lot more complex to implement for basically the same result. That is why we'll use this approach for our game. But before doing any of that, some visual adjustments need to take place. When we contemplated the idea of adding a wind simulation to the game, we took a long hard look at our environment panels and found a problem that was in the way. The problem in question can be spotted in our first two middle ground panels. You can see that if we compare the size of some of the visual elements, there's a lack of logic in their proportions. Elements from the first panel should be bigger than those of the second one, however it's the opposite that's taking place. This needs to be remedied if we wish to add our wind simulation, otherwise the mismatch of proportions will tarnish the effect. So to fix this, we'll redraw and adjust some of their visuals to create a good continuity between them. With our proportions now fixed, there's still one more adjustment we need to do before implementing our wind solution. We'd like to bring your attention to one particular aspect of our middle ground panels. If we compare the distribution of trees between the two, you can see that one has them individually placed along the ground line, while the other has them arranged into overlapping groups. These small agglomerations need to be broken down in smaller pieces, otherwise we won't be able to move each tree individually. To accomplish this, we have to separate our panel into 6 different layers. Trees on a specific layer need to be at the same perceived Z position, as well as far enough from each other so that they don't interfere with the movements of their neighbors. With that done, the time has come to implement our wind behavior. The way we'll tackle this is by taking advantage of the same techniques we used to create and animate our 3D models. Most dynamic 3D objects are made of 3 components. First, we have the mesh. A network of vertices, edges and faces. The mesh is basically the skin of a 3D model. Then, we have a system of constraints. It's often represented by a group of bones. This skeleton dictates how the mesh can be deformed. However, this cannot happen if we do not have our final ingredient: skin weights. Skin weights are used to bind portions of a mesh to specific bones. That way, the skin of a model can fully bend with the bone's movements. When these 3 components are fully implemented inside a 3D object, you have all the necessary elements to freely animate it. However, for our current situation, we'll need to adapt this specific technique to 2D sprites if we want the same dynamic result with our trees. To accomplish this, we'll use one of Unity's preview package called 2D Animations. 2D Animations is a toolset that allows us to completely deform 2D images. We achieve this by doing the same basic steps we would do on a standard 3D model if we wanted to animate it. First, we generate a 2D mesh overlapping our sprite. We then adjust some parts of it depending on how we want to deform our image. We increase the vertices density in regions where smooth deformations are needed, and reduce vertices density in places where there won't be any warping. We also try to mostly align the triangles of our mesh with the geometric flow of our drawing. That means triangles should follow the curves of our trees if we want a better deformation result. When this is done, we then create bones on which we'll bind the mesh. The first one is our root bone to which all other bones are attached. We assign them to tree parts we want to bend. Trees' skeleton are organized in a forward dependency. This means that if we move a specific bone, we also move all of its children bones associated to it. Finally, we bind the mesh to our new skeleton structure so that we can begin applying skin weights. To get a good starting point, we first auto-generate skin weights across the entirety of the mesh. It's not perfect, but it gives us something to work with. After that, we adjust each bone's influence on the skin so that we can get the deformation we want. This step is quite time-consuming, as it requires you to make a lot of small adjustments to iron out all the kinks of different positions. When we're satisfied with the result, we import our sprite into the scene so that we can start animating. Our last order of business for today will be our combat UI. Throughout development, we periodically updated our combat UI to keep up with advancements we made to other parts of the game. With each new changes, we were able to trim down the bulkiness of our hilt and clean up its visual presentation. A majority of these adjustments were done for visual clarity to offer good feedback during gameplay. However, one aspect that was still left to be desired was its overall style. Since our first iteration, we always felt that our hilt lacked a certain identity, something to make it more grounded in our fantasy. It was made of generic skulls and shapes that weren't bound by an overall theme. But now that we have a clear singular vision for the narrative surrounding our game, we can finally rectify this problem. When creating UI elements for a project, you generally want one cohesive visual theme. For HOOS, we define our core identity with two specific elements. Nordic/Celtic wood carvings, and ancient metalwork. We chose this specific combination of styles because it allows us to fully hone in on the warrior aspect of our game. Because of the fact that Nordic carvings were often used to relay tales of bygone heroes, this makes it a perfect match for the fantasy we're trying to sell. Through their intricate details and symbolism, we can transport players to a time ruled by ancient legends. But simply using wood carvings on their own won't be enough, as their overly detailed presentation can create too much visual noise. That's why we plan on breaking these complex patterns with simpler metallic shapes. By using metal as a more supportive element, we can create designs that are well balanced between their complexity and visual clarity. So here's how it looks when this unique style is applied to our combat UI. For this version of the hilt, our main goal was to update its visual style, but keep its original silhouette mostly unchanged. The features that received the most drastic makeover are the skulls. Basically, we decided to replace them by a warrior effigy bound in chains. We adapted the centerpiece into a face that more organically melds with the player's health indicator, and replaced the side skulls with clenched fists bearing a mysterious sigil. In addition to this, we rounded up the edge of our cog's teeth and added more complex patterns to the entry points of our chains. In the end, all these new pieces add up to create a more stylized and cohesive design. Now, let's see how everything comes together in action. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll implement hit effects. Make sure to like, comment and subscribe, and we'll see you next week for the new episode of our Road to Steam series.